Well, hi there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Amazing on last minute. And so we're going to be diving into the rock and roll world. And as far as I've understood, that's basically where all are grounded, right? Working with artists that are on stage.
True. I do pretty much everything that you could probably name in documentary work, but specifically working with the musicians and working with music in general is just, I don't know, there's really nothing like it. It really is one of my favorite things to do and be around.
Is it the artist, or is it the music, or what first drew you towards the genre?
I guess it's a bit of both, but really it's just probably the music itself and sort of, I don't know, I don't play an instrument at all, so I'm always in awe of the music making, whether it's whatever genre of music or, it's just, I always find it very impressive. And I'm always constantly learning something new about how they do it or the songwriting process. So it's all just, super interesting, and I think that's kind of goes in line with documentary in general. Like you're always learning about something new as you're working with the subject, and that's makes you kind of, you're endlessly curious. So I think when you're working and you're constantly asking questions about something, it just makes the work even better, maybe, because you're trying to inform. Yeah. Partly, as well as give an experience visually, but also like explain some things to like what would eventually be the audience.
That's interesting. The way, how does it come together? I mean, because in terms of the way you see how the movie gets evolved, are you part in the beginning of the process, or is that something you start out and then bring Jessica in?
Well, I've had the pleasure of working with Jessica over 10 years now on a lot of the Foo Fighters documentary projects that we've done over the year. And generally how those come together is they'll have a general idea of what they want to do. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time developing that idea, just trying to pinpoint who are the subjects we want to interview, who we want to speak to. And, the first documentary film we did together, Sound City, we spent a lot of time in the pre-production process, just thinking about how we were going to make these interviews look special and how we were going to, there was live music performance components to it and giving each one an individual look. And Jessica and the camera department were excellent. Putting together specific looks and trying to make each one look a little bit unique and special.
Let's watch the trailer before we dive maybe too deep in it to get a feeling for it. Just kill the lights, please.
All of the biggest bands in the world started out like this.
You got to get in the van if you want to make it in this business.
I wanted to be with people that wanted to make music, record, and get in a van and go experience the world.
We would hit the stage in between like those long drives, and when we were doing those van tours, it was us against the world.
It's the greatest thing you could ever do. I just felt like we were this like roaming band of gypsies. We show up and we rock you.
I've actually never toured in a van.
Okay.
So, can I go now?
Yes.
What happens in the van is the foundation of who we become.
You just can't find anything like pulling into a truck stop at 3 in the morning.
It creates this unique perspective that we all share.
You have to go through hell and high water, to put it lightly.
Am I willing to give up everything for this dream?
People just want to kill you for the color of your skin. It was crazy.
You have to go till your throat's dead.
A lot of the attraction to doing this was the unknown. You were free.
Playing to an audience is like, it's some kind of other dimension.
We were attracting fans. People were shocked when they saw us.
You played clubs not until you didn't want to. You had to until you got good.
Music can change somebody, and it didn't in my case.
It's really important to find like your family. It might take a while, but it'll happen.
Why do you do this to yourself? Why do you punish yourself that much?
There is no pain when you're on stage. The pain comes during life. The guys I was in the van with 20 years ago are still my band. And I don't know if they would be if we didn't have that experience together.
There's no guarantee that it will ever pay off. The reward has to be the experience.
That's what we are. We share our love through music.
Did you ever feel like giving up and going home?
Never. Never give up.
How do you blend this stuff together? Because there's this feeling you get so, driven into what was in the past, and then suddenly you see the present is like where you shoot it and how it's done. How does that come together that it pops like that? It's impressive, yeah.
Oh, I would say that's definitely the editing, but and the masterful gathering of all that archival. But from my standpoint, it was pretty clear from the beginning that this was going to be a talking head plus archival picture. We weren't going to shoot verite scenes. We weren't going to shoot musical performance that was new or creating any new music. So, as a documentary filmmaker, you're constantly trying to reinvent the interview, because it seems like a simple thing, but there's actually 1,000 different ways you can do it. With this project particularly, because it was about musicians cramming themselves into a van and going on tour to just, try to learn how to be good musicians and get their sound out there, which is a very punk rock attitude, like, well, let's just go do it, and they're like eating bad food and they're sleeping on floors and, living a sort of terrifically messy lifestyle, but loving every minute of it. So my thought process just going into the only thing that I could control in this film was basically the interview, was to, not be too precious about what it was going to look like not be too classic or, stylized or perfectly three-point lighting, We would often just show up on the day, maybe 2 hours into, not seeing the location, or it was either a music studio, sometimes a hotel. Maybe we would get an Airbnb kind of spot that was convenient for the musician to come to. And my feeling was to compositionally just give the impression of almost like what you might feel like if you were in the van with the musicians themselves. So if you lean your head on the side of the window and you have this foreground, and then you sort of see towards this van at this focused point out the window. So I would in the space try to sometimes find some kind of foreground element that just gave you that feeling, and then also with the second angles, trying to maybe make it almost a little too close. Plus you're pointing the camera at very famous musicians, and as much as they're all sort of aging, I didn't really care about that, basically. It was just kind of I wanted you to feel like maybe you were in the van with them, which is kind of loaded, to be honest, but those are the only things you can think about. This is the only part of it that I could control. And then I also had just always a third camera that was handheld and kind of roving around and getting different angles, but then also catching Dave when he would ask his follow-up question or have a laugh or something. And that I wanted that camera to be able to expose the production, see the light stands, and just the other cameras sometimes are in the film, and the camera operators, because all of that had to cut with that sort of handheld, messy archival. That I knew that they would be digging up eventually.
Is three-point lighting still a thing for you, or is it you moved away from it?
Definitely moved away from that. I see a backlight, I'm just like, wow, what's going on here? But there definitely is something that I would consider more of a classic kind of, interview, whether that's just more of a longer lens choice, or, more of a medium shot, or safe, and compositionally, you know, on the one side of the frame to make a nice, you know, thirds. But with this, I threw all that out the window and just tried to get a little weird with it. And if, like, you know, we could kind of shoot through the drum thing, or, you know, just, I don't know, have a little extra headroom, or even be like a side angle in someone's ear almost. It was like, that was okay, given the subject matter.
How's it working with the superstars? Do you get time to do something, or it's like fast track and they get bored?
Do you want to jump in on that?
You're at the mercy of these people's very busy schedules. So sometimes you're only getting 2 or 3 days notice. We don't even know what location we're going to be shooting at. And we've worked together for so long that I've gotten a little too comfortable with how well she can make any space look. So it's always trying to get, well, at least can we get 2 hours to set up before somebody shows up in the chair. And you know, we've done well over 100 interviews with Dave at this point. And so we're all comfortable with what each person's going to bring to the situation. So yeah, we can do it pretty quickly now without too much prep, but it always looks great.
Yeah, I would just add to that, you know, Dave himself, like, you know, he's having a conversation with another musician. He's not like a journalist that comes with questions and, you know, has done a bunch of research. Like, chances are he knows this person personally, or if he doesn't, maybe he'll do a little Wikipedia thing. But he's more about just like having a conversation. So you can't interrupt that. Like, that's part of the performance almost. So it's really important that, as we've learned, and as I've, you know, gotten yelled at in the past for stopping to maybe tweak a light or something, you just don't do that. You don't stop anymore, you know, because you can't interrupt that flow. I mean, it's joy for Dave to talk to these other musicians and discover commonalities and similar experience, you know. So it's really fun for him, and you never want to mess with that, you know.
Yeah, it's a different kind of a jam session, really. You know, it's sort of like, you know, working with a lot of these musicians, you realize that they're all pretty open to a free form kind of a situation. Like, it doesn't need to be very structured. It's like, oh, hey, we're just gonna sit down and talk and do this thing. But yeah, to Jessica's point, like, once it gets started, don't interrupt. Just let it happen, and they're gonna do their thing, and just kind of go with the flow.
A and B, usually, 2 cameras, you know, more or less on tripods, and then like that third roving camera, like I mentioned, that was sort of there to be a little messy on purpose and hopefully kind of help the editor, you know, with that flow, like you were saying, of messy archival or still photos, and like, you know, just blending the interview performance, you know, into the film. Yeah, so 2 cameras, you know. I would sometimes, find a kind of nice wide. Sometimes I would shoot the close-up. It really would vary, and the good news is I had like the other main cinematographer on the film is Todd Bell, who has been a colleague for like 20 years, and I trust dearly. And because of the scheduling of this, which was very sometimes spur of the moment, and you know, I was doing other projects, he was doing other projects, we could kind of tag team. Fortunately, sometimes we could show up together, which just made it more of a fun day all the way around. But you know, he was able to take the reins with, you know, on this one, just because, you know, we've all lit interviews and been present in, you know, company that's larger than yourself, and it was just easy, to be honest, you know? Like, that part was easy.
How did you prep for something like that if it's on such short notice? Is it just like you have something with you, it's all in the van, and you jump on it, or?
Well, John owns a couple of Blackmagic cameras and some great prime lenses. We shot the film with Zeiss Super Speeds, which are just good old workhorse lenses, in my opinion, very fast. And so when production really just had sort of the camera package on the ready at any given time, and then it was just a matter of bringing along, you know, like a sort of 2-ton grip package, and we would just had a gaffer and a key grip, you know, sometimes fairly short notice, but yeah, just basic tools, just enough, just enough, never too much, never not enough.
What's basic for you in a package?
For interview lighting, just having a couple different flavors is really important. You know, having like a HMI 1.2K or 1.8K, sky panel, quasar tubes. I always like to have a Fresnel, you know, sometimes turn it into a Jolico if needed. And, you know, maybe just a good old-fashioned 2K tungsten that hardly ever works, but, you know, just enough, different flavors that have different qualities of light, because when we would show up to these locations, you just get inspired by the space, you know, it's, sometimes you have to move furniture around, just kind of muscle your composition into place, but for the most part, you know, you just sort of find a frame that is maybe just a nice, I would hope anyway, photographic like composition, and then like land into that and work from there.
When we talk about lighting a face, what's important for you there? What do you look out for to feel that it's going in the right direction for you?
Good question. I guess really something that also matches the space you're in. I mean, it's not just about the face, so it has to sort of doesn't feel completely out of nowhere and artificial. And then just mainly with interviews, the goal is to just create an environment where you can control it for that good hour or hour and a half or however long, you know, they'll just be back and forth talking. You can't walk into a room and like, oh, there was that beautiful shaft of light coming from the window, because, you know, 2 hours later that'll be gone. And if you really liked it, then you better set a light and create it, you know. Really, it's just about maintaining consistency. So when they get to the editing, you know, we're talking for an hour, but what makes it into the film is only 3 or 4 minutes of really great dialogue. So, you know, you just want every time they cut to that scene or shot, there's just consistency and there's no confusion. I mean, you know, you don't want to fall into traps, basically, and I've figured out over the years of experience how to like avoid the traps.
What's a trap for you?
A trap would be to be like seduced by the lighting upon location when you got there, and putting all of your forces into making that great, and suddenly the light changes and like the magic's gone. Or you know, like variable cloudy days can just be your enemy. You know, in and out. You don't want to be like riding the iris, but I've, you know, certainly been unfortunately placed in that position from time to time. So you just figure out ways to, okay, well, if it's one of those type of days, we're going to avoid the windows, or we're going to, you know, put diffusion on the windows and push a light through it, and so it stays the same. And you know, it's just like walking into any narrative scene, really. You want to control it to a certain extent. When it comes to faces, I guess, you know, really it's just, in this case, you know, we were just going for a naturalistic vibe. So nothing too hard, nothing too artificial, really, was the rule.
What about eye light? Is that something you set, or you just take it from the environment and what's coming in?
I find generally when you're putting a light onto somebody's face, the eye catches that light. Sometimes you have to maybe bring it down, and you know, you don't want it to be too shadowed, but I don't really set an eye light per se.
So now we've been in the macros of your work. When we step back out again and you see like you're going into new space, you're trying to get a hold of it, how much do you think about the person sitting in there, that they feel comfortable, that they're not overloaded by technical stuff? Now that, how do you get a connection with that person actually coming into the room?
I always sit in the chair. I always sit from their perspective. Actually, sometimes we'll even try to light from their perspective and recognize what is maybe a distraction or too much or too little, and then be cognizant of when there might be other people, like in their eye line. So, I ask them to move, I want that space, whether it's Dave with another musician or just another director just interviewing a normal person. You want to just create like a very sort of safe and intimate space that doesn't feel like they're, under scrutiny. I mean, in our case, they're rock stars, they're used to everything. But, sometimes when you're working on projects with real people, you have to be really sensitive to what that experience feels like. I mean, I don't really feel comfortable with the camera in front of my face, and some normal people handle it well, some, get a little closed. So, yeah, I always like to sit in the chair and kind of really scan the room and see how it just feels for their experience. And then as far as a personal connection, I mean, that varies. It really depends, Sometimes you get to have a laugh or something, but mostly it's business. You're just the person behind the camera. It's okay.
Is there something you prep ahead of time? And you have an artist, you got a time for it. They have a feeling that when the person comes in for the interview, is there stuff you have to think about? How to set it up that when people come, they're going to feel comfortable getting into a situation? Is that something you do?
Not too specifically. I mean, it's not to break it down into like this routine, but specifically with this film, when you're dealing with talent of a certain level, like they have people around them, and if there are any specific considerations, you're going to know about it before they show up. But for the most part, they're already friendly with Dave, and people are always on their best behavior when he's around. And no, everybody was always really easy and relaxed, which I think speaks a lot to what Jessica's been talking about, like just making sure, the crew isn't running around with their hair on fire and everything is like very calm and controlled and relaxed, so that people feel comfortable when they walk in. They can sit down and have a conversation with their friend, and we're just sort of, the fly on the wall capturing that.
Before you go into an interview, is like the archived footage, is that something you already know ahead of time, what that's maybe going to be edited towards, to get a feeling, how the film's coming together, basically?
I'll let John speak to that, but all I can say is that going into something blind like that is you just kind of get an idea. If it's a music doc, like that's what you're going to be getting back. That's what they're going to be cutting with. In this case, it was like old handy cam footage a lot of the time, or like rock show footage. So you can get some kind of sense of what that might look like, but I don't know. Did you actually do like pull stuff before you got started?
Yeah. During the development process, you're thinking about, what's the overall, goal of the film, what do we want to talk about, and identifying the individuals you want to interview, and then kind of knowing what archival already exists that's going to get you there. But really, you just have to lean into the fact that you're going to have all these crazy mixed formats. And Dave, as a director, he loves punk rock. He loves things to be a little bit gritty and to feel real. It's kind of like this overarching theme in all of his work that he directs. Like, it's about human connection, it's about the emotion or the vibe two people have together and how that might change when you bring a third person in. So when we're in the post-production process and we're editing, it's that same sort of thought process. It's like, okay, well, here's a piece of footage that might illustrate the point someone was trying to make. We're not going to think too much about if it's old VHS and it looks like crap. We're just going to find a way to work it in, and then in the color correction process, just try to even it out a little bit. But we don't really worry if the frame size jumps. Okay, now we have this beautiful interview footage, and now we're going to cut to a 4:3 VHS. It's all shaky, and there's barely any color in it. Then we're going to go to a black and white still photo. We're just going to jump all over the place because the rhythm of that feels right for the story. The archival research process starts really right at the same time when you're trying to schedule your interviews. So we're reaching out to people who may have traveled with the artists, roadies, old managers, current managers, just friends. Old girlfriends are a great source of archival material. It's fantastic, the stuff these people save. And you're asking them to dig up an old shoebox from their closet and go through and see if they can find photographs from when this band was brand new and traveling in a van. And so you're sort of identifying people that you can tap to ask for things. And then once the interview starts to come in and the editor starts working, and we work with a writer, story producer, so as you're trying to flesh out these interviews and turn it into a story, you're kind of aware of certain key pieces of archival when you're going to interview some of the bigger names.
Are you part of the editing process? Do you look people in and have a look how it's coming together?
Not that often, sadly, but I mean, sometimes. But I mean, in this case, maybe more so on projects that I would consider to be more complicated and challenging, like Sound City, the first film we did, which included, actual musical performance and a little bit of control of just more like the lighting and creating the environment that the artists were going to play and make music in. And then in Sonic Highways, we would end each episode with like a music video performance of the song that the band made during the course of that episode. And so but even then, there's, you just hand it over, honestly, and know that it's in really good hands, like once it goes there.
Yeah, I think we've built a full arc from finding the footage, which is amazing. I mean, that process, how long does it take actually to find the footage and get it together?
I mean, sometimes, over a year. At this point, we've made so many doc projects with Dave Grohl that we've kind of, at least footage that exists of him and the Foo Fighters and anything that might be related to their history, we've pretty much uncovered it all, and we know where all that stuff exists. But when you're getting into some of these more obscure stories, it's, it can take the better part of a year to find somebody and then kind of get them comfortable enough with sharing some of these like cherished personal memories. You really have to treat it with respect because in some cases it's like their most cherished item.
I actually have a question. I don't know if it was the first interview, but the interview with DH, who has a really, difficult path to stardom and addiction. I didn't film that one, but I wish I did because I wish I could just heard those stories. But was Dave interested in telling DH's story? I know he's been talking about the van doc forever, but was it specifically related to that, or was that sort of something else as far as his relationship to DH and wanting to tell his story specifically? Do you know?
No. He just had a lot to say.
Right.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of, Dave not having too strict of an agenda going into an interview. It's like, let's just sit down and talk to DH, obviously, about the main subject of the film, but then the conversation just started going down this path, and he was really happy to follow him there, and, DH really cracked his chest open and showed his heart there. It was pretty impressive.
Sitting in the chair and listening to the conversations, all of these conversations over the years has been I like to call it a master class in rock and roll, because you just learn so much, you hear so many great stories, only a fraction makes it into the film, so it's really a privilege just to be there.
In that case, I'm looking forward to see the movie then, to get a little bit of insight into that, what's going on. Well, thanks so much for coming. Is there any questions? Come along. Yep.
Yes, I really love the beginning of the project. It's usually some of my favorite time to be the start of something new, and having the privilege to dive in and figure that out. I'll often sometimes make a lookbook for things, but it really depends on the subject matter. And the thing, I mean, it's great to shoot interviews, and oftentimes, you know, you're showing up with the camera to point it at somebody that's very impressive, has either very big, famous and well known, or just is an amazing individual anyway. So, but my favorite thing to shoot really is our verite scenes. It's just the, you know, being in a room where you have no control, but you're trying to control the uncontrollable, and like a scene with two people, for instance, but it's a single camera, and you have to constantly be thinking about composition and lighting and editing too, and knowing all the shots you need to gather. So the editor, once they get it, will be able to like explain a story, you know, well told visually. It really varies though when it comes to just picking the style. I'd shoot a lot of sports stuff too, or sometimes, like there was this one project, it was amazing, it's called Invisible Portraits, and it's about the sort of history of the Black woman, and I conceived some really, I enjoyed the process of coming up with visual ideas that were going to represent this journey that the director was telling. I don't know, it always varies, but I also love shooting the things that are the thread that is going to flow throughout the film too. It wasn't so much in this case of what drives us, but you know, sometimes you just need that visual element, whether it's macro details of something or something textural, or even just, you know, landscape, you know, location, B-roll elements that you know are going to be necessary to layer the whole story together. I don't know, it always varies, but I do really love the figuring that part out, and I think about it a lot, you know. I did a project with Simone Biles, the gymnast, and her road to the Olympics, and I did a lot of lens testing, for instance, and I found these Kawa spherical lenses that when you had one singular point of light, like the sun, or just, you know, one hard source, it would make a literal golden ring lens flare. And they were also old Japanese lenses, and the Olympics were in Tokyo, and I just was like, this is it, yeah, I'm gonna put these golden rings lens flare in front of my athlete, my subject. Little things like that. I probably overthink all of that stuff, but nobody else is thinking about it, right? So I'll just keep doing that. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
I have a question actually for John.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about the relationship between an executive producer and a cinematographer. Like, how much input do you have into the selection of the cinematographer projects that you're doing, and how much interaction? What do you look for in cinematographer projects that your studio is working on?
At this point, we've worked together on so many projects that I just trust that Jessica's going to do exactly what's going to be most appropriate for the situation.
But what about others?
I don't want to work with anybody else. No, my whole approach to it is to just make sure that you're giving people enough time to do what they're best at. You know, you're hiring somebody for their expertise, and you know, I always like to defer to someone's expertise. Like, I don't know how to do what cinematographers do. I can look at people's work and react to what I see. You know, oh, I like this, or I prefer this to that. But I'm never going to micromanage or put somebody in a corner and tell them they have to use this specific tool or work in this specific way. That's dangerous.
Yeah, and I could just add to that, John is so great at, when you know that you need something specific, like making it happen. Like, for instance, on Sonic Highways, we had 8 episodes. We went to 8 cities. You know, by the end, we were going to be out of money, out of budget. But like, you know, when we were like, okay, well, this is exactly what we need for like this one. You know, he makes it happen. And I think as a producer, if you're not listening to that and allowing to bring the right tools to the table, and yes, you have to make concessions here and there. I mean, you know, everything within reason. But you know, I think he understands that you can't stifle. You have to sort of uplift, and that just means bringing the right tools necessary to get the job done, you know.
Well, thanks so much for joining. Give us some insight. Cool. Thanks so much.